Meine Damen und Herren, guten Tag, and that's it for my German. Hi, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm surprised how many people decided to stay to the very end of the conference. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. I hope I will deliver interesting content for discussion. I come to you from the beautiful city of Amsterdam. I do live there and work there right now with Brenntag. I will tell you a few things about myself. I come from Poland originally. I will be speaking in English. I did live in a few places. I'll try this one, yeah. In Poland, in UAE, in Dubai, and right now in Amsterdam, in Netherlands. Why that's important? Because that gives some variety of perspectives in different governance setups and just enough governance. I did work in three main companies, and I will be using examples from those companies, right? So that would be Thomson Reuters. Reuters you can know from Reuters News. Thomson is like Bloomberg Financial Information at that time. Now they evolved, right? Allegro is like a smaller Amazon. It's one of the biggest e-commerce marketplaces of European origin, 70% of the market share in Poland. NetGuru, digital acceleration, software house organization, building for clients. So we were delivering innovative products for clients. Actually, some of your companies were our clients at that time. And then currently I'm with Brenntag, and here I'll copy from Eric, right? When someone asked me about joining Brenntag, I had no clue what this organization is, right? This is B2B, business to business organization. It's world's largest chemical ingredients distributor, right? So how can you imagine what it does? We would be in pharma, in beauty, in nutrition, in a few other places. And whenever there are chemical components, right, we would be potentially providing those, right? So, and two main business lines. What would be essentials? So imagine Coca-Cola. If Coca-Cola would be our client, then they do have their well-hidden setup of how to make Coca-Cola, but they need to do it from something, right? Those chemical ingredients, we could be supplying them, right? So buying in large quantities, transferring, storing, repacking, selling. Very simple business from the concept, right? That's essentials, right? Specialties would be the same. Coca-Cola would be saying, hey, we'd love to have a new flavor, right? It's apple and orange Coca-Cola for some reason, right? And then they could come to our laboratories and we could be trying to generate this kind of solution for them and then eventually supply them with chemical ingredients for that as well. So that's in a nutshell. Of course, many more things there, but that's in a nutshell what the company does. It's a supply chain organization mainly. Now, I've put few things here that you could want to know about me for additional chats. I do play board games. I invented one as well with my friends. I sail a lot. I learned how to kite surf. I'm very good at jumping up. I'm very bad at going down. Right? I do read a lot of fantasy and science fiction books, and I do love dumplings as a food. So that's about Przemek. You came here to listen about faster, better decisions, a framework for agile governance in the digital age. Now, when I was preparing for the session, I was wondering what will be already covered, and that's because I'm the last one, right? So it's very hard. And then what could be interesting for you? And of course, there are some lines there. But what I ended up preparing is that I will have few statements or concepts, right? And I will have a lot of print screens for the organizations that I work with, giving you examples of how we did it. And then I will be commenting what I think worked, what didn't work, and why, right, within those. And then if you'll find something interesting, we can chat about it or whether it could be useful for your organization or not. So that's the plan. Does it sound good? Good enough. Okay, some notes there. All right. So if I would say only one thing that is important in the just enough governance, just one thing, right? Or maybe what you would say, right? What's the most important thing when you think about the governance? Well, just enough governance, that's the topic, all right? Or fast decision making. And then, sorry? Data. Data is important, absolutely. Anything else? Easy. We build, sorry? Risk mitigation, absolutely, as well. So we have a data. Based on data, we can have some insights. We can look at the risks and we can move things around. For me, if I'm thinking about it, and I'll do it to some extent to the contrary of the very first speaker that we had, David, right? I think it's super important to know your strategy, right? And to actually have a strategy. And while you don't have to build all those houses of the strategy houses, which I will have here as well, but it is important to understand so you and your team knows what we are doing, where are we going, and actually even more important is understanding what are the priorities based on the strategy. So you could use any tools that you want, right? I'm used to 7 Strata. If you haven't used it, it's quite easy tool to play with the strategy, be it for the organization or for the department or for even for the larger program. But why is it important? Because my experience with working with the boards is that they want everything, all right? And what you want to do is you want them to understand that, okay, if I cannot get everything, or at least it's a huge subset of things that I want to do, let's group them into some areas, right, of how are we thinking about things to eventually be able to sequence those and maybe get out of them their priorities, be it 3, be it 20, be it whatever. If you are able to get only those 3 steps, right, from the list of I want absolutely everything, and some organizations do have money to spend on multiple things at the same time. Right now, times are a little bit more challenging, right? So actually prioritization is coming from the boards as well. But you may have seen this, right? A lot of investments in a lot of digital areas, right? And business activities, right? Not all of them that much supported by the prioritization within the organization. So my take would be, if we are able to get those priorities, then the teams will sort out majority of the cases by themselves if they understand what are the priorities, what's the strategy, and what's the direction. Now, just to give you an example, one of the organizations I worked with when I joined, we did have 200 strategic projects. Right? So I'm not sure if that's a big number or a small number for you. For me, it sounded quite big. 200 strategic projects. How can you really differentiate in the prioritization within that? So we ended up doing the iterations. We ended up with top 20, as we called it. Now, as you can imagine, it's hard to convince the management board to get down to 20. So the top 20 was actually 28, and that was the best agreement that we could get. But that already helped. But for those teams, what we're trying to achieve is we won't go from processing only requests that everyone throws at you what we should be doing into giving this direction, giving this vision and information and priorities, and then proposing the best solutions. This is what we've heard from many speakers already today, right? We want fast, big, the right solutions adapted to the right frameworks within the organization. But then how do you do all of those? In our organization, in the current organization, we had three main principles that we worked on, right? And that would be, we are there as a technology organization and between technology and business, right? We are there to first and foremost help the business grow. Right? This is our ultimate mission, right? We need to help the company grow. But when you do that, right, you think, how do you enable value, right? How do you grow? How do you move forward with, right? And usually that may come with a lot of complexities, especially if you go through the acquisitions. We heard Eric, I think, saying 45 ERP systems. Now our landscape in this organization is 20 something. So through growth, acquisitions, and so on, right? So we also need to be able to simplify the future, right? And we need to build the unified backbone. So how we think about the organization is that we do have regional flavors, we do have business units flavors, right? We do have some separate companies, but we are not going in the path of decentralization, right? That everyone can do what they want, right? On the technology landscape, at least, we go with the joint technology backbone. Right, that we aim for the unification around those things and some synergies that come with that, but also some regional flavors can stay. So of course we would have a lot of priorities. I think I cannot share them, so they exist, right? You do have some things, you see a lot of yellow right there. Those are the things that may have not worked as we expected, but that would be something that we're moving forward. So if that would be only that you just set priorities and leave everyone be, that would be beautiful, right? But what we see in the larger organizations, and then Brenntag as the example, is 18,000 people, 70 countries, 600 locations, right? Multiple business lines. It is a complex organization, right? So how we're trying to look at things, right, is to be able to classify those things in few different areas, because you may be working differently depending on how you classify the type of work that is being done. And of course, you can call it run or business as usual versus innovation versus some bets and so on and so forth. This is one of the interesting models, Synefin model and framework, where you're saying, okay, depending whether you classify it as complex or complicated, right, or simple or chaotic, right, then you need to have a different response to those. So when things come, right, we do assessment, and one of the discussion points would be, okay, in which area does it fall? Should it go to the innovation lab, right, to actually explore those things? Does it go through the natural, we call demands, so work request, right, demands process of focusing on those? Or is it something that is just keeping the lights on, or compliance activity? Right? And one of the things we find interesting, maybe you'll find it interesting as well, is that there are exploratory initiatives. Right, so those that are in the R&D that the person before me, Andreas, I think, mentioned, there are some new R&D solutions. And then the interesting thing there is that we ask teams to and ourselves to think in paradoxes, right? So we need to balance things. Okay, is it already going far enough with the strategy, but does it fill our values, right? How do we balance, and that's something, again, that was mentioned, right? The today versus tomorrow. How much do we need to focus on what's happening right now versus the future? What is our identity doing here, right? There are some dilemmas, right? Okay, should we be as creative as possible, or should we focus only on the high-level information? In the governance setup, right? How much control, centralized control or local control should be there versus autonomy? And that goes to many discussions that we had about the EU AI Act, right? The data governance, the security elements. Where do you put the control? Where do you have it, right? Internal motivation versus external motivation. What is the competition doing, right? We do have companies that are one-person shows that are growing rapidly, and they can take our market share, right? So looking at all of those things is important. One thing that we see, and I will mimic someone from the previous discussion, is you need to act as fast as possible. So the governance needs to be just enough governance. That's the term, right? You need to have this control. You need to have this level of decision making, and I'll show you how we did it in one or two examples, right? But you need to make sure that works to the advantage of the organization, and that it can move quickly enough to test some things and the solutions, right? So I've mentioned prioritization. I'm not sure how it's in your organization, but what I've seen so far in multiple places is that people talk about prioritization and they say, yeah, I understand there are a few main priorities. But actually, when you ask them, is there any framework or setting things up, right, and deciding whether this or that should be priority when it comes, then there is some problem behind it to actually explain why something is a little bit higher or lower on the list, right? So what we did in one of the organizations, and it's something that you probably have seen and maybe used, right? It's bubble graphs, right? And I use it here as the example from the real life setup in the organization that maybe I'll show here, right? Is that we would be actually forcing management board to make those discussion points and the decisions, right? So we would be visualizing those things and then asking them, okay, based on what do we make the bubbles? So what are the important factors? And usually that's a beta. For almost any and every management board, that would be a beta, right? But the second one is interesting, right? So what do you measure it against? And one of the most interesting setups that we've tested and seemed to work and was yielding results was that we were looking at the probability of the belief, right? So the probability of reaching the growth, of reaching the goal, right? Because it's beautiful if you have all those nice business cases, right? And you say, oh, I'll have ROI in 3 months, right? And we'll earn 20 million or whatever, right? Those business cases look always beautiful, right? But do people really believe into those and in the wider spectrum? And that's an interesting check. So we had a management board check of the belief of the probability of delivering value, and then putting those within this frame, right? The bigger the box, I think, the more investment it required. The smaller the box, the less investment. Then the higher it was the beta result, right? And more to the right or to the left would be how probable it is that we'll actually deliver this value, and that's based on the actual list of the priorities in the organization. And discussion around that becomes a real interesting discussion. It's no longer just a list of things in the random order, right? Of people, yeah, this is more important, this is less important, and so on. And it's very hard to visualize it when you look at just at the numbers in the table, because usually you just look at one or two numbers, right? So this kind of visualization, or any other visualization that you would use, right, is very helpful for the discussion. We put it in front of the management board, and then we force them to discuss, and then discuss and agree on the priorities. Those priorities may change, yeah, but they are there, right? And then of course there is the element of that some of those just have to be done, regulatory compliance and so on. They just have to be done, right? But also you have, I think, I even don't know whose model is it McKinsey or Bain or one of those, right? But basically they call the bankers bets and so on. So that's something that helps us a lot. What we also did there is we asked a very simple question, right? A lot of people are talking about starting new projects, right? Or where the project should be in the priority list, right? We're asking, should we be doing it in the first place? And huge programs, of course, right? For the management board level, right? Should we be doing them in the first place? Should we maybe stop them? Should we do something else? And just by asking them this question, right? So it's either, yes, no, maybe, right? You do get a feeling, again, of the belief of the management board. But why is it important, right? Because if management board doesn't believe in that, why would we be investing in that? Their people will not believe, probably, right? They will not stand behind it. They will actually not find solutions to drive it, right? Or you need to build a special task force to actually deliver that. So extremely simple tools for actually very powerful discussions that we have. And maybe the one additional thing here would be about the principles, right? So in the digital transformation, when you're thinking about that, there is tendency in a lot of organizations to thinking, hey, we need to build everything, right? So scaling up the data department, scaling up the delivery teams, right? Scaling up, and building everything by ourselves because we will have the best solution. It needs to be tailored to us, and so on and so forth, right? My take is that on the principles level, we should agree what will guide our decisions up front. That's ideal for setup for the organization. And then you should clearly decide what is the unique selling point or unique competency or unique capabilities that you should keep in your organization, right? And those are the things that, of course, you should invest in, you should build, you should have a strong muscle internally. For everything else, or for testing things, it's much better to test it with the external partners that may have solutions. They may have some interesting ideas. It's fairly easy to do MVP, a test, right? Works, doesn't work, brings value, doesn't bring value, and we can then build a proper business case, right? So when you balance that, right, and you find those things depending how far or how close they are to the actual core competencies that you want to have, then it's about building or buying. And of course, even if something is your core competency, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to build something from the scratch if it exists and it's well known and it meets your needs, but it's about people being able to support it, right? The business people, the technology people, and so on. So having this discussion, build versus buy, upfront on the principles level helps a lot with knowing where and how to grow teams. And when someone internally is pitching something, right, you roughly can know whether it will use internal or external talent, resources, and so on. So that helps us a lot. The other thing would be about the structure. So there are so many different ways of how you can structure things in the organization. Not everything is within your power, right? So how business is, if you are in the technology, right? How business is structured is not that much in your power, right? Because whatever is the strategy and how do we want to bring value to the organization, that will be hopefully reflected in the regional setup, in the unit setup, in whatever setup, right? Putting politics aside. Let's say it makes sense, right? So that's a business setup, right? So then, but how many layers of the decision-making, portfolio setup, and so on are there? And now a lot of people would be saying the flatter organization, the better, and the less layers, the better. Can argue with that, you can agree with that, that depends on the organization, the level. I believe fairly flat organizations are the way that the world will look like, and it's moving forward. But for the governance, you may build different layers and different setups depending on the type of activity that you're looking at, right? So you can easily imagine that if something is that complex and that big and that impactful on your core identity of the organization, that you may require more levels depending on the type of decision to be made. And there may be some that should be just taken down, make a decision, don't ask me, right? So that's the element of discussion. I'll show you how we structure it in the organization. But before I go there is this Jürgen Appello. I'm not sure if anyone knows him. He's from Netherlands, I think. He was the author of Management 3.0 concept. Now, he had an interesting way of thinking about structuring the organizations. At one point in time, he attempted to, hey, can we reimagine how organizations work based on the building blocks, right? So you can create different types of building blocks in the organization, and based on the value chains and the organizational value to be delivered, you set up organization in that way, and then you start adding a few different layers for the decision making. I won't go into that, but it's actually quite interesting concept. We did take it in one of our organizations and we adapted it as the exercise for the target operating model. Every now and then when you do transformation, right? Business transformation requires some new operating model or new activities, right? Bigger or smaller changes, right? That's called TOM, or target operating model, right? That was excellent exercise for us to play around, right? Putting aside people currently and putting aside completely current setup and just saying how it could look like based on the puzzles, right? And then out of that, we derived some things that could help grow our organization. Now, I'll show you those few huge slides that we have. So we no longer do it, so we already finished DIDEX transformation, but DIDEX is digital data excellence, right? And then that would be the whole digital transformation for the whole Brenntag group. We would be running that. That would be public knowledge, investments in hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Benefits in the same range, expected benefits, right? And so on. So how do you structure and govern that within the organization? And I wanted to show you a few things. Some of them are probably fairly straightforward. On the high level, you basically do have your steering committee, right, or executive steering committee. For us, DIDEX committee, it's management board, right? So one thing, and some of people mention it, you need to have a buy-in of the top leaders in your organization. If management board is not your steering committee and you're doing digital transformation for your organization, you will most likely fail. You will be in those 70% for sure, right? If they are, then you just have a chance of not failing, right? But that's one thing. So management board is our steering committee, or would be our steering committee. Then you may have executive committee that, depending how your organization looks like, that is larger decision-making body that's across units, across regions, across something, however it's structured in your organization. Those are the executive members that if you do not have their buy-in, then you will probably not succeed, because they will not motivate their people, right, to give a chance to some technologies if you want to unify it across. And now I totally buy the bottom-up approach, and we do have that one as well. But there are some things in the bigger organizations, if you are not going for the decentralized setup, that you want to have unified across the organization. If one of your regional presidents would not be supporting that, then how can we expect that their people will really get into the data cleansing, right? Get into Salesforce trainings and actually get that, right? So we really need to get those people there. And then what we've set up, it has this beautiful name, right? GECCO. So that's Global Excellence Coordination Councils. That's McKinsey talking, right? When they came a few years back and provided some name, but it actually stuck with us, GECCOs, right? So That's basically a portfolio steering. Right? And then the important thing is to think in the value chain, right? Where do we have some value creating activities, or where do we have enablers, right? And in our case, remember, we are a supply chain partner, right? We are a supply logistics operator for the companies. So we have customer journey and supply partner, right? That's journey, end-to-end journey for them. And what do we do there? Supply chain journey, so how do we actually deliver? And then we do have a huge element of technology enablers, right? What helps driving the organization? ERP, because we're trying to unify the landscape, right? And all the other finance enablers. ERP is across, it's not only in finance, right? And then employee journey. So what touches the employees, the workdays of sorts, right? And then for the governance, I want to show you, I'm showing this to mention one thing. On the decision making, it's an interesting thing. Usually we have one chairman or one person that drives the portfolio steering for that group. But in some cases, and we had it already in 2 different organizations, in this one and in Allegro as well, for specific portfolios, we did have 2 chairs, not 1, but 2 chairs. And now that comes with its pros and cons, right? The pros would be you do have a larger overview, especially at that time we did have 2 main big divisions, this essentials, right, and specialties, right? We needed them to talk in unison from the perspective of priorities because we have one backbone, right? We're doing one technology backbone. So if they do not align, then we will be constantly having political fights on the technology level rather than on the business discussions level. Right? So we do those discussions there. The minus is that what happens if they do not agree, right? And that's where, and that goes to my previous point, that goes for scaling up. If they cannot agree, we do have escalation path for the decision making. So they are empowered to make a decision on almost anything and everything so that it doesn't have to go up, right? And I think the people there would right now have roughly 10 million euro decision power, right? So pretty big portfolio decisions already that you can make there, right? But if not, then it goes to executive committee, right? If executive committee cannot make a decision, which would be very rare, right? Then you would go into the management board, right? And with that management board, in our case right now, it's only 2 people, right? So hopefully one of them decides or 2, right? So different ways of setting this up, but actually interesting. And from the other organization example, those 2 people would be, we did similar setup, but we put one was director from the business and the other one was director from technology. And they were both responsible for the results, but the KPIs for both of them were both business driven, right? So the technology director, well, he had his own technology elements as well, of course, for that area or the journey, but actually would be looking into business results of the organization. That helped a lot with driving decisions of what we work with, what teams work in, and very much empowered there with the teams of how they drive. So yeah, some of those things, a different setup, a different element, the portfolio overview that we have there. So all of those things are important. And with the last few minutes that I have, there's a few other concepts that stay with me and we can chat over the roundtable if you'd be interested, right? So roles and responsibilities, right? With all of that, it doesn't matter how you set up the governance, to be honest. It's important what they are empowered to do, right? What decisions they can make. So I mentioned this 10 million, but before it was much, much less. If they cannot make decisions, right? Or for example, be it 25K or 250K, right? Those are so small decisions that basically everything needs to go up, right? Then, yeah, this is not just enough and fast governance, right? But then you can be setting up different things, make the decisions. If you empower those people and tell exactly who does what, right? To the reasonable extent, we can give a veto power, we can give some other things. So we'll see, okay, different priorities, different list of people involved, what they can do, what they cannot do, and so on. People usually say that they're doing that. On the very high level, they do RACI or whatever, right? And they stop at that, right? They actually do not define roles. This is what I see in a lot of organizations. Defining the role and what's expected from you, but also what you can do. That's something that really helps with the organization. And one of the things that helps with that as well, even on the management board level, is just having a contract. Right? I'm not sure if did you write contracts with your teams or with your boards? Anyone wrote contract? Okay, few people, right? That comes from the coaching, Agile coaching, or any other leadership management in that sense, right? Where you would be saying, hey, let's align how we work. And of course, if you are a new joiner and everyone else works in a specific way, maybe you'll adapt. But ideally, for big things, big changes, big transformation, or even any of the teams, you discuss that, right? What are your strengths or weaknesses? How do you want to collaborate? How do you make decisions? Again, right? Who makes decisions? What happens if something doesn't work, right? And yeah, when I was running operations in one of the companies, we did have a short contract after the workshop, but for the collaboration and for decision making later on, that would help us a lot in driving things forward. So that's something that worked pretty well. And again, I don't see, and you didn't raise hands, right? Maybe you're tired, right? But actually doing that with your team, be it a matrix project team or being with the other team, that's something very valuable, right? And then delegation and empowerment comes with that, right? How much are you empowered? Again, I should know what I can do, what I cannot do. And this is an interesting setup from Management 3.0, right? The empowerment comes in different layers and levels, right? So the same person may be very good at thing A, but have very basic knowledge in thing B. So that's okay. So the empowerment, in my case, at least in delegation, work based on the task and activity at hand, or area at hand, rather than on the specific person, that I always will throw everything for the same person with the same level of authority, right? You can balance those things. And it's an interesting discussion. We had a discussion with the team. And one of the also interesting things would be, if in your team you already have agentic AI, right? Agent, then what would be the empowerment you give to that agent, right? And then what do you want it actually to allow, and what you don't want to allow. So yeah, so that's it. In the rhythm, I'm not going through that. You do have a sequence of things that you can go. It will be in the presentation if you're interested. One, just think about how you manage calendar of the whole team and the whole organization. This is executive team's calendar, for example, that we had, right? And then some of things are joined for everyone, some are not, but then you can drive the sequence, how that works for the whole organization, if it's transparently known for the organization. So if they all know that we will be asking questions on Wednesdays for something, right? They can set up the team's potential update reporting or anything else, right? What do we discuss? All the different things from strategic alignment, reminder on the strategy, then realization of the strategy, and then what's future holds, what are the new requests? How do we prioritize things? Those are the things that we have discussions on. And one of the main things I wanted to raise here is that we manage by exceptions. That's an interesting thing for the just enough governance. You don't want everyone to report on anything on the meetings. You want data to be in the system that anyone can check. How is it going? But if something's not working correctly, or someone needs help, or someone needs alignment, that's when you take it up for the discussion. And that is exactly for the sake of solving the problems and helping them, rather than saying, hey, something is not working. So yeah. You need to iterate. We did have all those things. Every now and then, all those meetings will grow up, and there will be too many of those, and they will be too big, and too many people will be there. So on the regular basis, we do the review of those, and then we cut, right? And we just say, hey, we cut, we simplify, and we end up with some savings. So the recent result of the savings that we did, we removed roughly 25% of the meetings on the specific level, and we saved time for 44%. So when you think about it, it is pretty significant result to get. So it's worth it every now and then. Put in your governance model review of the governance for the sake of saving time. And with that, I think I'm just about time. So I will finish here with the just enough governance. Remember that. You need to prioritize. You need to make sure that your people are on board, but they will be on board if they know what to do, what's the strategy, what are the priorities, and then that they are empowered and do know how they are empowered and where do they go. And yeah, thank you.